Hey everyone, it's Foxx from modelmaking.guru here, back with part 5 of our build of the Bandai Mega Size RX-78-2 Gundam. Right, no more Q&A now, we're done with all that. Well, for this series anyway, maybe, probably, I don't know. I'll do more, but I don't know when. So, where are we up to? Right, so I have got everything ready, done a test fit, planned out how it's all going to go. Off camera, I have started priming all the main parts of the Gundam. Not everything, but most parts. Kind of ran out of the white Tamiya primer 2/3 of the way through. So some of it's primed in grey and some of it's primed in white. Dope. But what I wanted to show you in this episode, I don't know if it'll be a full episode, but I want to show you first off, is basically this. You remember when we did the test fitting, everything had these massive seam line. This isn't fully put together, this is still loosely fitted, so it's bigger than normal, but there will be a seam line right down the middle here. Now, to be fair on this kit, they are pretty minor, because it's such a big kit anyway, but it's still something I have to deal with. So, here is a leg I have seam lined and primed. Let me just zoom in a little bit for you and give you a better view. You can see the difference here. Again, I don't want to push these two together to show you exactly what the panel line looks like, but you can see the difference. This one now has no panel line at all. I was even able to seal in here, or fill in the seam in here, quite nicely and not make a horrible mess of this little bit of panel. So I'm pretty pleased with that. That's pretty darn good. Did on the front as well. You can see here the front is not like that. It's completely flat. This is what the seam line does look like. I've not done this bit because this part is covered up. So you can see here what the actual seam line looks like when you put these things together. So this has been sealed all the way down here and all the way down the back. I've not bothered about in here because I'm not really too fussed, and plus it'd just be an arse to try and seal those. So what I'm going to show you is how to do that. So let me just adjust my focus, and it's quite simple. It doesn't always work, and it's a bit of a you take your chances with it, but it's worth trying. You need a few things. Some Tamiya extra thin cement, some Tamiya bog standard super thin, super fat gloopy cement, not thin. You will need a selection of sanding sticks. What have I got? I can't remember what grade these are, but there's a sort of almost finishing one. There is a medium sort of grit with a smooth one on the back. And then I've got these two, which are, if I can find them, this one which is quite rough, you can hear that, it's quite a rough grit on there, this one which is a medium rough grit, and a selection of others. And one last thing you'll need is some sandpaper. I have some 220 grit. Now there's all different grits of sandpaper, but I grabbed this from work and it just happens to be 220 grit. Basically you want something rough, and this is good for getting in these little tiny areas. So what do we do? Well, I've shown this before, but I'll show you how you do it on here. Because this is a bigger part, it's actually a lot easier to work with than normal gunpla parts. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the glue to fill the seam. I've just noticed the lighting here is quite dark on this side, so I do apologise. We're going to put some glue in here, squeeze it together. The glue's going to smudge its way out of the crevice, and then we're going to use more glue just to seal it over, let it dry, and then sand it. So let's get on with this. So we have our parts almost placed together. So we're going to get some of the extra thin cement, and we're going to rather generously slap it in. Don't worry if it goes on the outside, and don't worry if you think you're using too much. You're not. So let's just get this in there like that. Again, don't worry if it goes on the outside of the seam, that's absolutely fine. It's not going to run anywhere. It's not that thin. And we're just going to feed it along the lines on either side. Now for some smaller gunpla parts, this is all you need to do. But for these I found they're big enough that you kind of need to do some extra bits as well. So then we're just going to basically squish it together. Squish. 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 Big, firm, manly squish. Now on some smaller gunpla parts, what you'd see is that all the glue in there would kind of ooze its way out, and you get this wonderful beading along the seam line, and that's what you'd then sand down. What you'll see on here though is that's not happening. The parts are too big, and by the time you finish adding the glue to everywhere, the glue's dried out partially anyway, so there's not really enough glue to smooth its way out. I'm just going to feed a little bit more in of the thin. This is the Tamiya extra thin glue. Just do it over the seam line. Just put it in there. Give it another smudge. Okay. And this is a good way of doing this instead of using fillers. I try and avoid using fillers because, well, basically I hate fillers. Let me just check my focus. The lighting is quite harsh in this, I do apologise. I'm trying different lighting techniques and none of them seem to work. Right, so that's going to sit for a minute. So I'm going to leave this for like I'm going to leave it for say 10 minutes, just to dry and harden a little bit. And when we come back, we shall use some of the thicker standard Tamiya cement. So, I shall leave that to dry. Back in a moment. Okie dokie, right, this has had 10 minutes or so to cure a little bit. Yeah, I kind of figured out the lighting in here is terrible for white plastic parts because they just reflect the light, and the white balance on my phone is not brilliant, so sorry about the glaring white. Yeah, so this has had 10 minutes or so to cure, and as you can possibly see, hopefully, I'll get it to focus, we've got some squishiness around the edge. In some places it doesn't look any different at all, and in some places the glue has started to squidge out. But like I said, because it's a big piece, by the time you get all the glue on and squish it, a lot of it's already too dry to squish out properly. So, what we need to do now is get some regular glue. This is just regular Tamiya cement. Now you can use any glue you want really. The only reason I use Tamiya extra thin is it's one of the thinnest cements out there. And the reason I'm using this is it's just what I've got. You can use any polystyrene cement. It needs to be the kind of cement like this that will dissolve the plastic. That's the idea. It dissolves the plastic, and what you're squeezing out when you squeeze it is dissolved plastic, not just glue. So this is the messy bit now. Take your piece, adjust your focus, and all I'm going to do here is simply brush over this crack, the seam, with the glue. I'm not going to brush, I'm going to dot the glue on so it forms like a bead over the plastic, and it won't, because it's thick cement, it won't gloop out everywhere. This is effectively doing what you would do with filler. If you're using filler, you make a bead over the seam. I'm just dotting it on so it makes a bead that covers it up. I'm being reasonably careful because I don't want to go too close to any crisp edges, because then I'll just end up having to sand that and it'll kill the crisp edge. So right here, I'll put some there. So the thin glue has filled a little bit of the seam line with its ejector, for want of a better word, and this is just filling it over even more. I'll just put a little bit here. I'm being quite generous with the brush. I'm not getting most of the glue off the brush. Now here I'm being very careful not to go into the little groove at the top because I don't want to lose that. But like I said, the good thing with this thick cement is it's not going to run and dribble everywhere when you apply it. So I'm going to let that sit there for a minute. I'm going to give it maybe 20 minutes to dry. I'm going to give it, say, 10 minutes just to cure a little bit, and then I'll turn it over and do the other side. Then I'll give it maybe 20-25 minutes just to dry a little bit more thoroughly. And when that's done, I'll go over it again with another coat. And what we're basically doing is you take the surface here, and there might be a seam line, say, here. And what we're doing is we're covering that seam line with a bead of glue, so that when we then sand over it, we sand it back, and the glue will have gone into the seam line. Tell you what, let's do it proper. Let's demonstrate it a proper way. Here we have two pieces of plastic viewed from the side. You put your glue on here, and capillary action pulls the thin glue down, so that when you squish it together, it squidges some out. So you get a little bit of glue coming out on the plastic that's melted. I've just painted on a blob of glue here, and then when we sand it back, hopefully what we get is all the glue from the sides will disappear and you'll be left with a column of glue that fills this seam. Now I'm going to do an extra one just to make sure, because what you'll find is this glue does sink a little bit, and you may find the occasional little pit, especially around here. It'll be nice and smooth, there'll be a little pit where the glue's gone in. The other disadvantage of using glue is it's kind of hard to see whether it's filled in or not, but you learn to distinguish it. But you can see there it's fit here, you can see it's going into the groove, but it's sort of sinking into the groove, so it might take a couple of applications. But I'll leave that to dry for 20-25 minutes. I'll add another bead, and then when we come back we shall start the sanding. So back in a moment. Okay, and we're back. Right, the glue has had about, well, I went to bed last night and I've got up now, it's about 12 o'clock, so it's about 15 hours or so to dry. If you leave it a couple of hours you can still make little marks in the glue with your thumbnail, so it's not fully cured. The idea is you want it to be rock hard over the seam. Now you can see here on the calf there is a little dimple, if I can get the light to shine on it. There is a little dimple where the glue's sunk in. Now there's two possibilities: either when we sand this down that little dimple will be at the level of the plastic anyway, so it'll disappear, or if we sand it down and it's still there, we'll just need to add a little bit more glue on top, let that harden, and then give it another sand. So it might take a couple of goes, but you can see now the glue has made this nice bead over the whole seam line. What we're going to do, I'm going to try sanding this part here, see if I can get you to see it. I don't even know if this is in focus. There, you can see the bead there. So we're going to sand this bit just a little bit, just to show you the principles of how to sand it. So what do? Well, very, very simple. We're going to use a variety of sanding mediums. Now I don't know the exact grits, like I said, so this is flying by wire, but I've got some rough grit sanding sticks. These are Ultimate Modelling Product sanding sticks. These are probably that's probably about 240 grit, and that's probably about, I don't know, 300 grit. I don't know the exact. This is a little bit finer, but it's still rough. This is quite rough. We're going to use. I had some 220 grit paper. I've made a little tiny piece and scrumped it up. But what we're going to do, we're going to start off with the sanding stick, and I'm going to do it flat. This is a reasonably flat surface. I'm going to do it flat like this. I'm not going to be going like this, I'm not going to be going like that, I'm not going to be gouging it in. I'm going to start off just first and foremost with a sort of seesawing motion like that. So let's get this done. So let's have a look. Right, give it a try. And see how I'm doing it. I'm just doing back and forth, lift off, back and forth, lift off. And I'm being reasonably gentle, I'm not going harsh on this. I'm just getting rid of this big bead first of all. Let's see if we can do it from the other side. Try and vary it from one side to the other. All I'm doing at the minute is reducing down that bead to the plastic. I'm not actually sanding, well, I am sanding the plastic, but the majority of what I'm doing is sanding that bead of glue down. Because it's had time to cure, it's rock hard, it may as well be plastic. Now because I'm keeping it flat, I'm not worried about this edge or the top of that little bit there. Okay, so that's coming along nicely. I can, if I want to, go this way. Just a little bit. Very carefully, because I don't want to take those crisp edges away. Okay, I can still see a little bit of the bead here. You can tell because the bead's slightly more... As soon as you start sanding the plastic, the bead is a little bit more shiny. So you can just see a little edge. Now, in the light here, I can still see a very faint hint of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with something harsher, just to make this work easier. You could start with this one, but I prefer to use the small, to go in gently and only use more force if I need to. So again, I'm going to keep my finger on there to keep it flat. I'm just going to go in and just sand it a bit more. If you're going to sand not like this, one of the ways to go diagonally, that way you cover most of it rather than just the groove, the seam line. You don't want to make a groove where the seam line is, because then you end up with a little pit, and that's just as bad as having a seam line. Right, so you can see now, hopefully, that seam line is ever so slightly visible, but what you're actually seeing there, I hope, you can see on camera, is the little vein of glue that goes through it. You're not really seeing the seam line. You're just seeing where the seam was and the line of glue. So what I need to do now is, by sanding this, it's a little bit rougher than the surrounding plastic. I can see here there's little sanding marks. All I need to do is basically refine that up. Whenever you do any kind of... Oh, the sandpaper, by the way, was if you wanted to get into a tiny area and do some real hard work. You just gently place it on and do that. Bit of that. But I don't need to do that because it's actually behaved really well and gone away. So, yes, when you're sanding, you'll start off with the rough grade, like 220 grit, 340 grit. I can't remember the grit numbers. The smaller the number for the grit, the rougher the paper. So 220 grit is rough as a bear's backside. 3000 grit is a nice, smooth, finishing sander. So we started off with the rough. I'll go for, this is a sort of medium, it's probably about 500 grit. I'm just going to go over the area I just worked. And I can afford to be a bit more circular movie here, because all I'm doing is trying to sand out the sanding marks I've already put in by sanding it the first time. So very gently, I'm not using any pressure at all. Just sanding over that. Again, trying to be careful of these edges. And then I'll go in with this, which I think is probably about 1500 or 2000 grit. It's quite soft. And this is just a nice way to buff it. And then last of all, on the back of that other one, this is basically like shiny paper. It's probably about 3000 grit, I think. I could be wrong. Go along to Ultimate Modelling Products website to order these packs. They're really brilliant sanding sticks. They're not expensive. And they come in all different grades. It's www.ump4paparetail.co.uk. I'll put it there. I don't know why I read that out. I can just put it at the bottom. So, we refine that back. And let's give you a little close-up looky-loo. See how close I can get with the iPhone of cameraing. You can see there now, hopefully, the seam line is gone. Now, like I said, you may still see where the seam line was as a line of glue. That's absolutely fine, because this needs to be primed, and any primer worth its salt will fill in little marks anyway, a little bit. So even if there is an ever so slightly visible seam line, it's probably just glue and it's a different colour to the plastic, so when you spray your primer over it, it will disappear. If it doesn't, you can always go back with more glue. Sand the primer off first and go back with more glue, but in that case we have a disappeared seam line. Now I need to do the rest on here. I did do this front part here and filmed it, but it didn't save, and that was really annoying because that was a beautiful seam line. It worked perfectly. So I've got to go off and do the rest of this leg. Once I've done that, everything else, and I'll tell you, primed. Those cans of primer, they are really, really great. I found Tamiya primer to be the best primer for me to use. Downside is it's a rattle can, which isn't perfect because you have to go outside to do it. But it's just dead easy and it covers perfectly. The downside is, for this model, I used yesterday about 3.5, 4 cans of primer just to prime everything, and that was a light coat. That wasn't even a full primer coat. So yeah, if you're making this mega size model and you're using rattle can primers, just get a lot of primers because you'll probably go through it. It's going to take me forever. I'm going to have to get a lot of paint when I'm airbrushing this. Right, so anyway, stop waffling. I'll go off and get this done. Finish all the priming, and when we come back we're going to make a start on the metallic inner frame parts, which I'm going to do a bit differently to the way I did on the Freedom Gundam. I'm going to try something new. So leave that with me. I'll be back in a moment.